Welcome back to The Whim. I'm Jonathan Sorsey, narrator and author of The Whim Stories. As a reminder, if you want to read along or want to discover other unrecorded pieces from The Whim, you can head to wanderingthewhim.wordpress.com. But without further ado, the title of today's story is Daisy. Panting, Lucian and the wizard stood poised on the blackened rocks. Lucian's stomach churned, and he gripped his staff tightly, preparing for the greatest fight of his life. Ahead of them, a black figure towered. His face was obscured by a dark helmet, but Lucian could feel his gaze on them all. "You should not have come," the figure said, his voice ringing across the blasted valley. "You do not seriously think that you could defeat me?" "It's over, Ichil!" cried Lucian, holding his ground. "Your reign of terror is at an end. We have given you more than enough chances to surrender, to repent, but you have laughed at them all. Now I'm afraid there can be no forgiveness." Lucian shifted his feet, preparing to fight. All around them were scattered broken remains of bones and armor, the remnants of Ichil's army. "You bluff," said Ichil. "You have lost too many of your number. You can never hope to bind me with this tiny, bobulous crew. You underestimate how strong I have grown." Ichil was right. They had lost many good men in the fight with his army. Mingled among the shattered fragments of bone were the empty robes and clothing of fallen wizards and soldiers. Each of them had been enchanted before the battle so that if they died, they would immediately turn to dust, lest one of Ichil's necromancers try to resurrect them. Now there were just 9 of them left, each some of the strongest in the whole realm. Except for Yim, the fish wizard. Lucian was not sure why he was there, or how he had survived so long. "We will see," said Lucian. "When all is done, we will see." The Dark Lord sighed. "I tire of this banter. We all know what must be done. Prepare yourselves to meet with oblivion." Red orbs of energy flared in Ichil's hands, and he hurled them at Lucian. The aged wizard sprang away just in time, counterattacking. Green sparks launched from his staff. The energy struck Ichil in the chest plate, erupting in a cloud of smoke and glitter. But instead of a terrific clash, or an explosion, there was another sound, like someone breaking wind. The glitter cleared, revealing that the energy had been harmlessly absorbed into the Dark Lord's armor. Lucian sneezed. He and the other wizards would have to concentrate their powers to subdue their foe. This proved difficult, though. Ichil wheeled, sending a cloud of orbs flying towards the wizards. He jumped towards Akir, one of the dwarf mages, forcing him backwards. Lightning burst from the hand of Thoris, the well-warlock of the group. It crashed against Ichil's armor with a blinding flash, but the moment it faded, they saw that it had done nothing. "Everyone, attack together, all at once!" Lucian called. Lucian unleashed a heavy barrage of green energy, while more lightning burst from Thoris's fingers. A line of ethereal silver hammers flew from Akir, and a swarm of fairies darted out from the recesses of Jorid's beard. Each of the other wizards flurried their attacks in successive salvos, chasing the jumping form of the Dark Lord, but then scattering when he landed nearby. It was no good. They were not even making a dent in his defenses, and although their attacks were keeping him somewhat at bay, he was toying with them, forcing them back against a high outcropping of rocks where they would be trapped. Suddenly, Ichil turned, raised both of his hands together, and brought them down with a crash. A solid beam of mystic energy shot across the battlefield and struck Akir, sending him flying back. Thoris and Jorid jumped forward to close the gap which this had made in their lines. Ichil continued to advance, a translucent eyeball forming in each of his hands. Flinging these at Thoris and Jorid, both wizards suddenly screamed and began to flee. There were very few that could endure the terror of being chased by Ikil's eye spells. Summoning his last magical reserves, Lucian tried to ramp up the pressure on the Dark Lord, hoping to draw his attention away from the other wizards long enough for them to recover and rally. He could not give up yet. Dodging, Ikil ignored his attacks, and turned to the other wizards who were trying to flank him. With several blasts, he knocked one off his footing and caused another to retreat. Then he set on Yim. Poor Yim, what was he doing there? He should have fled or given up long ago. He was a decent fellow, but not much good at wizard stuff. Flying forward, Ikil crashed into him, knocking Yim to the ground. The Dark Lord raised his hands above his head for the killing blow, and Lucian looked away, unable to stop him, unwilling to look. There was a loud pop, and then silence. Slowly, Lucian opened his eyes again. Yim was gone, but so was Ikil. His armor was still there, but it lay empty on the stony black ground. Bewildered, Lucian approached it warily, wondering if it was some trick. There was a strange smacking sound coming from inside Ikil's breastplate. Lucian peeked in. Inside, there was a small fish, yellowish and flopping helplessly around in the armor. He soon noticed that another fish lay nearby on the ground, squirming uncomfortably. Lucian stood for a moment in disbelief. Then, suddenly it dawned on him, and he laughed. Yim hadn't known the proper enchantment for incinerating himself upon death, so he had used a fish transmutation spell instead, and evidently it had affected both him and the Dark Wizard. It was a very old, obscure spell, one which nobody ever thought to guard against. There was no way to turn either of them back, but they would both be happy and harmless enough together in a fishbowl, Lucian figured. Sam slid the knife quickly down the side of the onions, trying his best not to cry. He knew that it had to be today. If Sam didn't ask Nellie Needles to the Markington Spring dance today, this morning, really, he would not have another opportunity before she left to go spend the weekend with her grandparents in Bimpton, the next village over. Jimmy Torrey lived in Bimpton. Sam couldn't let Jimmy take Nellie to the dance. It would all be over if he did. Blinking away the onion tears, Sam kept slicing. As soon as he finished getting the soup on for a boil and chopping the vegetables, he could slip over to Nellie's house and ask her. He'd have to be quick, so the pot didn't boil over and the cottage didn't burn down, and Mother didn't need anything else while he was away. Sam had been running errands and chores for her all day. He had run over to the Winkners to pick up some tea, then swept up the cobblestone floor of the house, and then done the laundry. But he was almost done with everything now. Once he finished with this onion, and then the carrots, he'd be free, for a bit at least.
"Sam," said a weak voice from the cottage's one bedroom.
"Yes, Mother?"
"I remembered just one other thing. Could you go out and water the daisy I planted the other day? It hasn't rained recently, and I don't want it to die. You'd best do it now before the sun gets too hot."
"Yes, Mother," Sam sighed. He set his knife down and grabbed a jar from its shelf, but felt immediately from its weight that it was empty. Sam frowned. A quick check revealed that the other jars in the house were also empty. It was a quarter-mile walk to the village well, and it didn't seem worth making the trip just to water one flower. If they were out of water, he'd have to go later anyway, of course. But he could do that in the afternoon, after he'd talked to Nellie. There had to be some other water in the house, somewhere. Glancing up to the highest shelf in the kitchen, he saw an odd, ornate vase, the one which Mother had bought last week from the oddment merchants. It was shaped like a very tall frog, stretching his lips toward the ceiling. When he had helped Mother carry it back from the market, the vase had had water in it, and there was a chance she hadn't used it for anything yet. Carefully reaching up to the top shelf, Sam pulled the vase down. Bingo! It had water. Sort of smelly water, and a little bit murky, too, Sam noticed, but he was sure the daisy wouldn't mind. Sam made a quick trip outside to the flower bed, and poured the water out onto the daisy. Sure enough, it looked quite pathetic and wilted, so much so that he wondered if it would make it, even with the drink. He did not have the time for flour speculation, however, so back to slicing onions it was. Sweat slipped down Mudmerp's bumpy forehead as he slowly pushed the lockpick deeper into the safe's keyhole. He wasn't usually this nervous during a heist, but then again, he'd never tried to steal from wizards before. The lock clinked, and Mudmerp glanced backwards, looking up and down the long hallway, which the enormous vault door opened into. He expected to see a ghost, or a spectral Jimmy, or some other strange scramp float down the passage at any moment, patrolling for the sleeping mages. If he was lucky, hopefully they would think he was just some sort of giant frog that had jumped in through the window. That was, in fact, exactly what Mudmerp was. But, of course, he was also a thief. The best thief in all of Slurg, the kingdom of the toads, which is why the king had sent him. Mudmerp's hand slipped, and he almost dropped the lockpick. It was hard to hold things steady when his skin was secreting so much mucus. He must be really nervous. He would need to take a long soak in the swamp once he got back home, to replenish his slime juice and oils. Mudmerp wished he had hands like humans did, without all the troublesome frog fluids which made it so hard to hold things. He was much slower at stealing than humans were, with his pudgy feet that made squish sounds every time he stepped, but he was also much less conspicuous. Or rather, more conspicuous, which made him less noticeable. People always expected thieves to blend in, to be quiet and stealthy, which was exactly why they were so unlikely to notice clumsy old Mudmerp. He had once walked into a museum and cleaned out their whole collection of golden potato sculptures, right in front of the tour guide, too. Everyone thought it was so incredible that they didn't bother to stop him. Suddenly, the lock clicked. Mudmerp smiled deviously and slipped his pick into his belt. He edged quietly along the gigantic door, up to the large metal handle. He grabbed the ring and pulled on it with all his might. It would probably creak, but Mudmerp hoped to get it over with in one go instead of dragging it out. The door groaned, grumbled, belched, and then popped open. The inside of the safe was much larger than it had appeared. A long, beautiful room of orange obsidian opened up like a hallway before him. It was about 20 leaps long, and all along its length there were shelves and paintings and tapestries on the wall, and piles of treasure on the floor, and old cardboard boxes with the words, "For Tommy," on them. The room was illuminated by a giant firefly that buzzed lazily around the ceiling. It looked delicious, but Mudmerp restrained himself, as he wasn't the sort of toad that had very good night vision. The only other thing in the room, aside from the mounds and mounds of treasure, was a very small bird with one big eye. It was perched on a small roost near the door, and looked quite asleep. It might have even been stuffed. Mudmerp stepped carefully into the room, letting his cool toad toes glide across the smooth floor. He had just made it across the doorway, when suddenly he heard a very faint noise, as of an eyelid opening. It was the bird. It was staring at him with its single terrible eye, and its mouth hung halfway open. Why did wizards always have such devilish, awful-looking animals? They stared at each other for a moment, and then Mudmerp raised a finger to his lips, hopefully. The bird screamed. Not chirped, or called, cried, or cawed, but screamed. In a flash, Mudmerp's tongue shot out, grabbed the bird, and shoved it down his gullet. The screaming muffled, and then went away. Mudmerp listened for a moment, wondering if anyone had heard the shriek. He heard nothing, and breathed a sigh of relief. He took a step forward, and froze again. There were footsteps on the stairs, voices in the hall. Panicking more, Mudmerp turned, tried to book it out the door, but slipped in his own slime and fell with a schloopt. The fall knocked the breath, and almost the bird, out of him, but also knocked a bit of sense back into him. He still needed to get out of there, but he couldn't leave empty-handed. Jumping up, he grabbed the closest interesting-looking thing, a very ornate goldfish bowl, and jumped over his slime trail, then hopped like mad towards the nearest exit. He would have been worried that the fish might have died or gotten flung out with all the sloshing, but the 2 goldfish in it looked dead already. Someone probably forgot to feed them down there in the vault. Mudmerp lunged out the window just in the nick of time. A trail of magic zaps and angry confetti burst out behind him, as angry wizards crowded at the window with their wands. Wizard thieving sure was a risky business. He hoped the king would like his catch, meager as it was. Maybe the dead fish were magic, or something. Sam slid the knife up and down with a rhythmic shick, trying to shield or turn his face away as much as possible as angry onion juice shot up at his eyes. He wasn't sure where Mother had gotten these onions, but it was like some sort of gnome scientist had crossed them with a grapefruit or a lemon. With each cut, a stream of juice assaulted him. His eyes already watered enough with normal onions, but this made things infinitely worse. At least his knife was a good sharp one. His dad had given it to him before setting out on his last trip, and Sam made sure to sharpen and clean it almost every day. It certainly was a beauty. Between the slow-cutting noise and the sizzling sound his eyes were making, Sam could hear Mother coughing in the other room. Poor Mother. Sam hoped she would get better soon. Mostly for her own sake, but also so he wouldn't have to watch his little sisters all the time. For a moment, he was glad that his sisters weren't there to tease him about crying. Then he froze. He realized he did not know where they were. He'd told them to be quiet, since Mother was sleeping in the bedroom, but now they were too quiet. Whenever they got very quiet, trouble was always afoot. Slipping his knife, she really was a beauty, into his pocket and wiping his hands on his pants, Sam ran outside. He looked out toward the flower garden, but didn't see them. The daisy seemed to be doing much better now, though. It stood proud and tall, revitalized by the water he had given it. Its crinkled leaves had all reinflated themselves, and it had turned back a healthy green color. Continuing his search, Sam checked by the chicken pens, but didn't see his sisters there either. He didn't think they could have made it into the woods in such a short time, but he had learned not to underestimate the two. 10 years younger than him, the twins had 10 times the energy and 10 times the imagination for ways of making trouble. Sam rubbed his hand along his chin, stroking the few hairs that were beginning to grow there. Feeling them always helped him think better. He decided he would check behind the woodshed before making the trek toward the forest. As he approached the small wooden structure, he heard a pair of voices whispering from behind it. "Sarah? Anne? Is that you?" said Sam, stopping and resting a hand on his hip. The whispering stopped. "Come on out. I know you are back there." A pause, and then both girls darted out from behind the shed, giggling and running in opposite directions. It was a typical ploy for them, and no wonder, for it often worked. Not this time, though. Sam jumped forward and grabbed Anne, swinging her up and over his shoulder as she squealed gleefully. Then he went after Sarah.
"Ah! Let me go," said Anne. "You'll make me drop my lizard."
"You're sure you're not a lizard yourself?" said Sam. "You sure are squirming like one."
"Yes, I'm a lizard," said Anne, "and I'm going to bite you."
Now, none of that," Sam said, reaching forward. He had almost caught Sarah, but at the last minute she altered course and slipped out of his grasp. He felt Anna's teeth scrape across his shoulder blade through his shirt, and heard her snap her jaw shut several times. He didn't know what he had done to deserve a pair of sisters like this. Mother always said he'd been very good when he was their age. Finally, he caught up to Sarah and slung her up on his other shoulder. He carried the girls past the flower garden and back up to the house. The daisy was certainly looking quite healthy. Sam sat the 2 girls down on the cottage's threshold. "Now look here, you 2, he said. "You'd better not mess this up for me. You know that Mother's sick and that I'm in charge, so you have to obey what I say. I don't want to go around chasing you everywhere all day. Now, if you're good and play nicely with your lizards here by the house, perhaps I'll have a treat for you at the end of the day."
"A treat?" Sarah exclaimed. Her eyes lit up. "What is it?"
"There's still some of Mother's sweetbread left over," said Sam.
"Where is it?"
"I'm not going to tell you. You only get it if you're good. If you're bad, then I'll just have to eat it myself." Sarah and Anne frowned.
"All right, we'll be good," they said.
Suddenly, a sizzling, hissing sound erupted from inside. The soup water was boiling over! Ever since he was just a little ratling, Rito had always wanted to be a pirate. And now, he could hardly believe it, he was finally here, flying along on an airship with a crew of ragamuffs and rascals, ready to raid the Toad King's palace. Rito adjusted his sword belt excitedly and rolled back the sleeves of his giant overcoat so his hands could reach out. The palace was just coming into view, and the crew was running all around the small airship, strapping down sandbags, sharpening their swords, and ruffling their fur to look more intimidating. They had already unfurled their flag, a giant white-letter pie on a black field. Grinning between his pierced ears, Rito looked down on the royal toad complex below them, the tiny shapes of the frog folk scrambling around, slipping in their own slime as they panicked about the airship's descent. They descended rapidly. They'd have to make the raid quick before the Toad Cavalry was called. Their airship was rather small, and they didn't have enough rats to fend them off for very long. "Everyone, brace yourselves!" cried the pie-rat captain, "and bring me all the gold and goodies you can!" The crew cheered, and the airship landed. All the rats fell in a heap, thrown against the wicker floor of the blimp. Renewing their momentarily muffled cry, they sprang up and poured out onto the roof of the palace. A few frog guards tried to stand their ground for a moment, but quickly retreated. Rito howled and surged forward, sword in his fist. For a moment, there was a traffic jam at the stairwell, as all the rats tried to push forward. Eventually, somebody slipped on someone else's tail, and the whole lot tumbled down the stairs. In the tumble, Rito's face got mashed against something, either a blunderbuss or a very pointy bottom. Probably Bib, the weasel. His sword almost got knocked out of his hand, and for a moment somebody's foot was in his mouth. Finally, though, they all spilled out into a short, stout hall. Picking themselves up, the rats all scattered in various directions. Rito followed several of the larger rodents down a hallway to the right, frogs fleeing before them. Soon they had come to a large wooden door that was reinforced and heavily padlocked. One of the rats reached into his trousers and fished out a stick of dynamite, jamming it into one of the locks. Striking a match on his chin scruff, he lit the fuse, and they all bounced down the hallway, covering their ears and waiting for the bang. They waited, and nothing happened. Of course, fuses always took longer than one expected, but Rito was impatient. Uncovering his ears, he heard a frantic blowing sound and the sizzling of the fuse. Then the blowing stopped, and there was a thunderous blam. A singed frog went flying down the hallway, followed by a puff of fire and smoke. The rats cheered and rushed back to the door. To their dismay, they saw that the door, and several of its locks, were still largely intact, but that a large hole had been ripped in the wood and metal near the locks. The dynamite rat jumped forward and slipped his narrow body through the hole. "What's in there, Nick?" said one of the others. "Lots and lots," said Nick. "Here, I'll throw it out to you through the hole." The rats lined up behind the hole as items were tossed out. A gold watch and a very ornate parrot, some silver spoons, and an orange coconut. When Rito's turn came at the opening, he could hear Nick struggling with something from the other side. "It's a heavy one," he said. "Here you go." With a terrible screech, a large, very ornate fishbowl full of water popped out of the hole. Surprised, Rito almost dropped it, but gathered his wits, and the bowl, just in time. "Right then, up the stairs and back to the ship, quickly," he heard Nick say. Turning, he ran back to the stairs. It was a very slow, cumbersome run, as the bowl was quite nearly heavier than he was himself. He was relieved that he didn't have to worry about sloshing it, since there was a very broad cork lid on the top of the bowl. But he could still break it, and he kept stopping and looking around to make sure he wasn't about to run into something, or someone, with the pirated cargo. While the fishbowl obscured his vision of everything else, he had an excellent look into the waters themselves. They were mostly clear, just a little bit murky, with 2 fish skeletons almost covered up with sand at the bottom. He wasn't sure why the Toad King would keep something like this around the castle, but then again, it was a very pretty bowl. one which Rito envisioned he might use as a secret chest or a bed. Ascending the stairs slowly, and narrowly avoiding fatal jostles several times from other rats, Rito finally made it to the top. By now, many of the rats had assembled on the roof, as they piled things into the airship, loading it down with valuables and trinkets. Rito ran forward to the side of the ship and lifted the bowl high above his head, towards the edge of the vessel. "Hang on there!" a gruff voice called, Jim Jam, the airship's steward. "You know there's no liquids above 5 ounces allowed on board." Without another word, Jim Jam grabbed the bowl from Rito and marched off toward the rooftop railing. Rito ran along behind him, crying out, "Wait!" and "Be careful, don't drop it!" and jumping up and down. Jim Jam was much too tall and too single-minded, though. Popping the cork off the bowl, he dumped the water quickly over the railing and onto the tile roof of the castle. Satisfied, Jim Jam smiled and handed the empty bowl back to Rito. "Enjoy your flight," he said, and stalked off. Carefully, Sam blew on the coals, fanning them back to life after the soup had boiled over and spilled all over them. Now they looked like shriveled grapes, or very disgruntled pebbles. He would need some more fuel to really bring things back to life, though. When he was satisfied that the fire wouldn't snuff itself out while he was gone, Sam ran outside to gather some sticks from the large willow tree that sat behind the garden. Willow twigs were wonderful for starting fires, and they made a very satisfying crackling sound when they burned. Sam marched through the middle of the garden, which was in dreadful need of weeding, stepping over piles of unspread mulch and decomposing kitchen waste. Halfway to the tree, Sam stopped in his tracks, distracted by one of the flowers. It was the daisy that Mother had told him to water. It was looking very healthy now. Its stalk seemed thicker and a darker, deeper green. Its leaves were lusher and broader. They had fanned themselves out above several nearby flowers, and almost seemed to shove them down or out of the way to soak up all the nearby light. The daisy was taller than before, too, Sam could swear. It came almost midway up his torso now. There must have been something in the water in that pitcher his mother had bought, some sort of frog fertilizer or something. Looking past the daisy into the distance, Sam could see down the slope of the valley that the cottage sat in, down all the way to Nellie Needle's house. Suddenly, he had an idea. Mother wouldn't mind, he was sure, not when he explained it to her. Quickly, he ran to the willow tree and gathered several handfuls of twigs and sticks. He needed to get the fire going as quickly as possible. Then he would be back to the garden. Ham sat patiently in the driver's seat of his cart, waiting for Grig to return with the rest of the goods from the castle storehouse. Next to him, the toad steward shifted back and forth nervously, looking upward often toward the top of the castle. Ham didn't need to glance up. He could tell from the racket that the rats must still be up there. Ordinarily, he would have thought a pie rat raid would be terrible for business, but for some reason the toad steward had insisted on continuing with their usual exchange, despite the upheaval. He assured Ham and Grig that the rats could not possibly make it all the way from the top of the castle down to where they were. The toad knights would beat them back presently. From the way the steward kept looking up, though, Ham doubted he believed his own words. Ham chewed on a piece of grass for a moment, then offered it to the toads. "Here," he said. "This'll calm your nerves." No, I'm fine," insisted the toad, wringing his hands. I'm afraid I don't chew." "Your loss," Ham shrugged. I'd better go check on your associate. Make sure he's finding everything," said the toad, hopping away. Ham leaned back and waited. It was taking Grig longer than usual to return, but he didn't worry about it. Come to think of it, he didn't really worry about anything, except for maybe that one time he got stuck in a tree. Nah, probably not even that. The only thing that bothered Ham just a little bit was that he didn't have any water. He ought to have asked the toad for some before he left. Oh well. Ham closed his eyes and munched on his grass stalk, swallowing a lump of saliva to coat his dry throat. Suddenly, he cracked an eye open. He heard something, like water falling into a pitcher. Turning around, Ham surveyed the back of the cart, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. just the usual collection of ornate toad pottery, watermelons, and jars of probiotic sludge. He looked up, but only saw the airship and the slope-tile roof which overhung the wagon from the top of the castle, stories and stories above them. Strange. He had heard something. Ham was just about to climb down from the wagon when Grig came trotting back, carrying the last basket of yams with him.
"All right, Ham, we've got everything," he said. "Let's get out of here."
Grig ran around to the back of the cart and loaded the basket.
"Hey, Ham," he said, "these toad pitchers were empty when we got them, right?"
"Yeah, why?"
"Well, there's water in one now," Grig said, climbing into the wagon's passenger seat.
"Pleased to do business with you both, Ham and Grig, oddment merchants,"
said the steward, flopping out towards them and waving goodbye.
"Come again next week."
"Thanks, we will,"
said Grig, waving heartily. Ham urged the horses to a trot, and they were back on their way toward Markington. With a satisfied sigh, Sam placed the pot back over the fire, which was now crackling happily with life again. It was not in danger of overheating the soup again any time soon. Coals would have to form again for that. Sam rose and dusted off his hands on his shirt. He could hear Sarah and Anne chattering away to each other outside. Hopefully the lizards would keep them occupied for a while yet. He still needed to finish slicing vegetables for the soup, but that could wait until later. He didn't plan on being gone long. Sam straightened his shirt and tucked it in, trying to make himself more presentable. Then he walked outside to pluck the daisy for Nellie. As soon as he rounded the corner of the house and the garden came into view, he could see the daisy standing tall above all the other flowers and weeds. It was still growing. Nearing it, he saw that its stalk was now bigger around than his thumb, and some of the leaves were broader than his hands. The head of the flower now came up almost to his own head, and its white petals gleamed in the sunlight. At its base, the flower had 3 very long, straight roots that branched out, supporting its massive form. They had pushed all the other flowers and weeds in a wide circle around it, out of the way, and it even looked as if it had curled around and strangled some of the plants. For a moment, Sam questioned whether he should really try to give the daisy to Nellie. It seemed too big and felt too strange. It was beautiful, yes, but almost in an unsettling way. But it was too good of an idea to give up now, so Sam pulled his knife, she really was a beauty, out of his pocket and grabbed the stem with his fist. Several of the leaves tried to brush him away, but he swatted them back. He held up the blade to the stem, trying to find the best place to cut it.
"Unhand me, rapscallion,"
said a voice. Sam startled and looked around. It was a very strange, breathy, juicy sort of voice. He didn't see anyone behind him, at the house, or around the path, or anywhere. Sam turned back to the flower and nearly jumped out of his skin. From the daisy's broad yellow center, 2 large black eyes stared out at him. A long, thin mouth spread out below them in a sort of a scowl. Sam supposed it was meant to be menacing, but it looked more comically unsettling than anything. All the same, the sight was quite startling, and he found that he had fallen backwards onto the seat of his pants in the grass. All he could manage to say was, "Oh."
"Who are you, and where am I?"
said the flower, scowling harder. It glanced around its surroundings for a moment.
"And why am I rooted to the ground?"
"You're a daisy," Sam sputtered.
"Ah, yes, I see," said the daisy. "That is very unfortunate. Workable, but unfortunate."
"Unfortunate? What do you mean?" said Sam. "You're a flower. You shouldn't have a face, or be talking, or be alive. Well, you know what I mean. There must really have been something in that vase."
"You are a smart one,"
said the flower, folding its leaf arms.
"Which is far more than I can say for a certain collection of toads and rats, and for many others besides.
But I haven't got the time to waste on such frivolous things. I must be off, and I'll be taking this."
The flower reached down and grabbed Sam's knife, which he had dropped when he got startled. It then proceeded to pull its roots up out of the ground one by one. Some of the smaller ones it left behind, but when the 3 main branches were free, they formed themselves into 3 rough legs and feet. This done, the daisy proceeded to shamble off in the direction of the woods.
"Hey, wait!"
said Sam, regaining some of his wits.
"That's my knife! Give it back!"
The flower stopped for a moment, but then started running as fast as its small, rooty legs would carry it. "Oh, no, you don't!" Sam yelled, running after it. He was not about to let a daisy get away from him, even if it was magic. Not with his knife. She really was a beauty, after all. He quickly gained on the fleeing flower. Plants are not very fast, as a rule, and it seemed to be struggling to run and maintain balance with a set of 3 short, bumpy legs. Sam had almost caught up to it, when suddenly it turned around to face him. He heard it say something, and extend one of its leafy hands toward him. A small disk of red energy quickly formed in its fingers, but suddenly it wobbled, shuddered, and then shattered, sending semi-solid pieces of magic something flying in all directions. One of the pieces hit Sam in the jaw, and another struck him in the hand. Both he and the flower were blown back. The knife went flying and stuck high up in the branch of a tree about 20 feet away. Sam lay stunned on the ground for a moment, before sitting up slowly. His ears rang from the blast, and his hand had started shaking uncontrollably. His teeth were chattering, too. Looking around, he saw the flower hobbling away towards the woods, shaking uncontrollably and cursing. Whatever it had tried to do, it seemed that it had backfired. Regardless, Sam was in no mood to pursue, especially now that his knife, his beautiful knife, was stuck up in a tree, and his jaw had turned into a chatterbox. And deep down, he knew that it could not be today. He knew he would not ask Nellie Neebles to the Markington Spring Dance. The End. Thank you so much for listening to today's story from The Whip. I hope you will consider following this podcast, giving it a review, and sharing it with your friends or family. I'm Jonathan Sorsey, and I'll see you at the next crossroads. Until then, farewell, and don't let the Narromites nibble.